Hey Kyle, hey Brennan.
Hello.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's good to see you guys.
I'm going to say happy Friday the 13th.
That enhances it, yeah.
In October of all the months, that's like hitting all the things at once.
Dude, Hugo, thanks for joining back on. Like I was really wanting to get your intro. So I'm glad that we got you back in for another session.
Thank you. I think I'll keep joining. So I was just on PTO, but should be fine
Nice.
going forward.
Awesome. But I had a quick question for you guys before we start with the meeting. I've been working on a library for handling dynamic GraphQL schema updates. And I was wondering, it's written in Go, but I didn't know if that was something that I was gonna share in the artifacts. I haven't added the tests yet for it, so it's not test-driven development. But I didn't know if that was something that you guys would be interested in for artifact management, or if that's ancillary to, or not really pertinent to this concern.
I mean, certainly interesting. It's like, it starts to delve into how could we do some of this stuff.
Yeah, I got it. I got to the point where like, wait, hold on. I got to make sure we're okay. We got one more minute. We're at almost to 3 minutes. I got to the point now where like you can take a GraphQL schema object and then add or remove into the nested structure, and then save that schema to a disk. So it's completely dynamic. And then the GraphQL schema object is you can convert from GraphQL schema to JSON schema and back and forth, so you can continually update it. So I didn't know if that was something that people here would find interesting.
Lots of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see.
That puts us at 3 minutes. Cool. Okay. I don't know. I didn't see anything from Rom. If anybody knows if there is he here.
I was just picking him on Slack.
Okay.
He doesn't show online, so maybe he's either running late or
Okay. Well, we can just kick off. I mean, I think we don't want to wait for too long and then we'll lose the meeting. So we have an agenda. I just started pre-populating the agenda with just some boilerplate like kickoff stuff, because I didn't like how we missed Hugo last session. So yeah, we can just call this meeting.
Can you paste the doc
Started.
Alex?
Oh yeah, excuse me. Yeah. And then while we're getting ready, Hugo, could you introduce yourself and your use case and your relationship to the artifact management?
Sure. So hi, I'm Hugo. I'm currently affiliated with Datadog, and I'm working a lot with release tooling, which has artifacts in general. And we also worked a few years ago with the Synapse spec, with establishing the Synapse spec. And so since this new work group appeared, I thought it would be interesting to join, understand what's happening, see how I can contribute.
Awesome. It's good to officially meet you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned Synapse. I might be showing my how much I don't know about this space, but maybe other people know about it. But right now, if you saw in last meeting, we're trying to kind of capture like all these different artifact management strategies and kind of get them all in the same thought space so that we can evaluate them and look at the juxtaposition of all of these things in the same space. Is that something that we would want to consider adding to our existing list of package managers or artifact management strategies?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I can try to go back and look more into it. The Synapse spec was essentially a specification of how to define a way to bundle artifacts and similar things into bundles that could be deployed to the cloud, like in this case, Docker, Kubernetes. I'm not sure if they ever managed to have a package manager. I know there was some tooling that improved the installation process, and that tooling might have some package management things around it. So I can look into it and then bring it back into discussion.
And that actually that's a great point. And this is kind of for everybody here. If we look back at our charter when we were establishing the working group, it does address bundling as well and unbundling. So it doesn't have to just be strict package managers. So if I think that would be a candidate if we want that in that same index of associated technologies. I think that would be something that would be applicable to what we're doing.
I can look more into it and then maybe post something in Slack. I know that the artifacts produced by the Synapse spec are meant to be OCI compliant, so that most registries can support storing them. But I'm not sure if they have any specific package management around that.
You said CNAB, right?
CNAB.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought you said Synapse at the beginning, so that makes a lot more sense.
Sorry,
okay.
accent.
No, you're good. Yeah. So that was just I've been very neurological lately, so Synapse, I guess, was on my mind. Yeah, that definitely needs to be in there. So that's cool. Okay. And then I see that Ram has posted issues and polls. So if and I don't know if we have any other admin updates before that, but I think if we don't have any other thing, I don't know. Did we post that the Artifacts Working Group website was the web content was on the tag app delivery website? Was that announced yet or? Okay. I'll put a link in here. So anyway, we now have a web presence on the tag app delivery website. So if hopefully that's being indexed and people can find it.
Yeah, I think we can share it. Yes, it should be okay, I think. I am trying to find the link though.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. I got it here. I'm just going to throw it in the notes here just so And so that's the charter and our working group information is now available there, so people can discover easy there. I'm not really sure how to keep that updated, but it seemed like it was mostly up to date, so I just left it. All right, and then Ram, did you want to jump into issues?
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. Yeah, so at least let me tell you what I've done, and we can discuss that. So I just took the first issue that Brandon filed on Debian as a template, and I created a bunch of other things that were that I thought made sense. And the second thing was the labels. So I added there are 3 labels that I added, which is bare metal, a container, and a Kubernetes ecosystem. So that way at least we sort of see where these particular issues fall under. Okay. And of course we can fine tune this. It's just a starting point, right? So this is basically so folks who come and take a look at this at least get a sense that we are addressing a broad set of ecosystems rather than just any specific use case. So this is how so the scope of the standards, right, that we are trying to aim for. Then what I've done is I've also added an issue for a conformance suite, so that the idea is, of course, we can do all the talking, but if you have no way of measuring where we are, then it becomes hard to see where we are going and how far we are and all of that stuff, right? So in terms of the documents, I've again taken Steve's original template and created 2 of these things, which is for RPM and NPM. So we can do a quick review of what is going on over there. So this is basically saying that if you have a list of packages, then so the requirement was are you going to support a query for a list of packages, then how do you achieve that query using this package manager? Is there anything that is equivalent to making this interface and this being the implementation, right? So and so on and so forth. So the idea was, let's see if we can pull this up. I just quickly put something together, right? So the idea is that I'm just putting some ideas in your head, right? So voicing my thoughts here. Feel free to agree or disagree. So the idea here is that we have this list package as one of the queries, and let's say that there is a client tooling that's going to make this query. Then how do we achieve this on YAM, for example, and how do we achieve this on RPM? This is an interesting case already because RPM captures the state on disk. What has actually already happened, whereas YAM is also able to answer questions such as, oh, you have not installed this, but what is available? So, and the other thing is YAM is already an HTTP service, whereas RPM is on disk, and YAM is a repository of RPMs. Now you could replace YAM with, for example, an OCA registry, RPM with container images, maybe it's something else, maybe it's Helm and NPM, whatever you want to call it, right? So as long as the interface is met, then these queries can actually sort of travel all the way and come out, right? So this is just an idea here. So coming back. So I've basically written this for a couple of them. This is RPM and NPM, okay? So I also put together a conformance suite. So let me show you if I can get that up and running. Actually, it should be, the run should be right here. So let's look at the organization of how the suite is put together. So in the testing.yaml, we had the linting. So I already added a conformance job as well. And the way it works is I used something called BATS, which is it's useful because it sort of gives me an ability to test with bashisms, which is compatible with most of the tooling. So I don't have to invent anything there. So it's like Ginkgo or anything, right? It's basically a test suite tooling. So in this conformance, what I've done is the way I organized it is package managers that are conformant to at least the queries that we currently want and the queries that we will at least aim for in the future. We can add to this list. So we have a bunch of package managers, keep adding to these, and that's it. And after that, you just run your test. So the modifications are so after this, the things you'll have to modify in this file will probably be just the package manager that gets added as you add more and more things, and maybe the queries that we want to add in the future. So that's how this particular file will evolve. Now, for individual package managers, you basically create something called rpm.bash or yum.bash. So let's look at this, right? So this is how RPM's verification happens. So basically said, just bring up a Rocky Linux container so that it does RPM things, and then you implement the list packages interface, you implement like this, and so on, and then prove that there is a way to get to this information within the scope of your package manager. So yum does something different. So if you have Python, PyPy, npm, and so on, you will just say implement that, and whatever name you give RPM, npm, and so on without the bash, that is what you'll gets added here, and that's it. Everything just happens automatically, right? So let's look at the run. Let's look at the checks of this. So two things have happened. One is the lint for all the markdowns, and there is the conformance test that has happened. So if you do the test, then let's take a look at the output of this. So as soon as this test runs, then basically it starts running things like this. So RPM list packages, you're able to list all the packages, but it's of course whatever is installed, because RPM is local. If you want to do yum list packages, then this is all the things that it can do. Then if you can do this. If you want to get a particular version, then it's able to figure out what the versions are. And of course, we can fine tune this, all of this, right? So once we have evidence that particular APIs can indeed, in terms of the interface, can indeed be implemented with the existing packaging, at least we have a way to measurably say, are these even achievable? So that's what it is. So feel free to go ahead and review this, and we can sort of, if you're okay with this, we can sort of build on top of this. Yeah, that's all I had.
Ram, is the intent, and maybe I missed the point, but like, is the intent to have these conformance tests and then eventually whatever search strategy that we coalesce around, we should have parity when we're from that solution with these conformance tests? Or is this just making sure that we've addressed all the criteria whenever we're populating this information?
So I think this is how I have been thinking about this. Let me just so this is what I'm trying to do here, right? So one of the things that come out of this group, I'm guessing, is the overarching theme is standardization, right? So we want to be able to standardize certain things. So search, you want to standardize across things, right? So unless you do a suite like this, how do you know that a particular query is possible across ecosystems, right? And once you're able to answer that question, then maybe we can sort of ask more questions. So what are the gaps that we have, and how do you close those gaps, right? So this is basically a way to demonstrably understand where we are at. So that is the goal of this test.
So I'm trying to sort out how this actually does give us that connection between the gaps. So when I think of what we get out of an OCI registry a day, I know the features that we get out of it. I'm having a hard time tying together that here are the commands that I'm running and how what the command is tells me what it's doing. What functionality does it need from the registry?
So let's say that you want list versions, right? So in the OCI registry, right? If you want to implement list versions for OCI, then you would say something like, in the spec, you will say, get me all the, do the OCI query of tags list for a particular repo. So that is the implementation of that interface.
But if I'm looking at
I
some of
think
these
one of
things,
sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was just going to build on that because I think this is what you were kind of getting at. So it shows how tag listings partially satisfies the version question, but using a Helm example, it's missing the ability to get the a range of versions. Like there's no way to, oh shoot, help me here with this. Who am I looking for? I guess Alex to some extent. I'm looking for the Helm experts here. Because there was some gaps the way Helm was trying to use tag listing to get versions. So it's like there's, to your point, I think, Brandon, is it shows that it starts to meet the objective, but it didn't complete it. So there's still a gap that we want to fill. Is that filling what Ram and Brandon you were highlighting?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm looking at the RPM example, and so when I look at like filter a list of packages and it just says yum list and yum list CL-*, I'm trying to map, okay, what is the yum list command doing there versus how does that map to what we need on the registry to support whatever yum is doing under the covers? And I don't have here what yum is doing under the covers to know, are they missing functionality to be able to implement that or not?
So do we care about what yum is doing underneath the covers, as long as the output that comes out of that query satisfies what we want in terms of the output of the query?
I think that's what Kyle was poking at. If I look at the questions he was asking on your PR, and then I just saw his PR, the draft PR that he submitted, there he actually went to that next level of detail.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the problem from not just what's the command line instantiation of something that asks the question, but when the question gets asked of the data store, what is that interface? Like what's being asked, what's being returned, what that data transfer looks like, to understand more at what would be the requirements on OCI if we were to use it for something like this. So I think one of the things, so Ron, you asked the question of what is, do we care? And I think last week, someone brought up a good point. I think it might've been Brandon, but about, there's this, from a solutions perspective, there's do you download the whole catalog and then do your query on the client side, or do you keep it in the server and do your query there, right? And I was arguing one way, I don't remember which way I was arguing, and someone brought up the other one, like, oh, this works pretty good. Well, it works for app pretty good, right? And so that's maybe that's kind of an argument to say that maybe we do care because we want to learn how these things do it so that we can learn what the best approach might be. I don't know.
So I would like to point out, right? So we're already having a good conversation across ecosystems. Sorry, Steve. And by no means I'm an RPM or a package manager expert. I'm a noob in all of these. So this was just a starting point. Go ahead, Steve.
No, finish your thought. Keep going.
No, that's it. So this is exactly what I want to achieve from a conformance point of view. So from a central point, so the conformance is giving you the interface questions, and the whatever things that you plug into conformance is answering the implementation questions, right? So so that's what I'm trying to get out of here. So Brandon is asking these questions from an OCA point of view. Somebody else may ask it from a help point of view, and so on and so forth. But at least at the conformance level, we are able to say, this is achievable, this is not achievable, these are the gaps. And I don't, and you can always say that the way you have implemented your conformance is incorrect. That's all. This is all good stuff.
And I think to tie it back a little bit to what I'm hearing a little bit of what Kyle is kind of poking at and Brandon, and is the question of server or client side, which one's better? This always goes back to what's the best design? Like, well, depends on what the requirements are. So they're one of the design criteria, I don't know how to label it properly, might be server or client. Because there's times where a client can be more efficient because it already has the data. There's other times where you say, well, I have an ephemeral client, so if I have to hydrate the state every time to process a question, that's a conflicting design requirement. So I think it's scoping the capabilities, and maybe one of the things we list in that whole, the grid is it's not just, can I ask all these questions? Can I do all these APIs? Is how many of them can be done local versus remote? And why do we care? Because there's offline scenarios where local is going to be really important. And you could do it because I have the information on the client, or I have a local replica of that server, right? So what I'm getting at is, yes, these are pivots that if we can capture, we can figure out how to measure what requirement they match.
Yeah, another way to phrase it might be, we've captured really well what capabilities the tool has with the tool's current backend, but we haven't captured, if we were to try to swap out the backend to point this to an OCI registry as the backend of that tool, would the tool still work? Or does it need functionality that we don't currently have today in OCI?
Thank you, Brandon. Yes.
Yeah, that specific one is a great example of Helm, right? With the challenge Helm had, is they wanted something to scale better than the chart museum stuff, so that it could scale to lots and lots and lots of builds across each, but we lost some functionality. Helm, whatever, the community lost, as there was benefits, but there's losses. How do we fix that? So we're adding and not trading one for another. And again, I also want to be careful. This isn't all about centering can we move everything to OCI? It's more about how do we fill the gaps across the package managers, so that if RPM does something really good, can it be added to NPM and so on and so forth. So, and I keep on using SBOMs as that example. Like each distribution point should be able to distribute their own SBOMs, and we shouldn't have to move NPM to OCI to be able to do that. That would be my aspirational goal. If they wanted to do that, then that makes sense, but that shouldn't be the requirement.
I was wondering about, as we're trying to get parity with all of these other artifact management strategies and the capabilities that those have. It seems like there's another part to this too, though, that I think we're going to see patterns or other abstractions, so that we can derive from the lessons of all of these. So, but I don't think that those are in the rote details that we observe those package management strategies right now. I think that there's capabilities that we might want, or there's might be things that we want to talk about extending our functionality, and so I'm just trying to kind of keep an eye on also is I don't think we would just want to have the capabilities that our previous package managers have. We want to have, I think it'd be preferable to have new enhancements and capabilities beyond what these offer. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to capture that too in what we're talking about.
I think that's the goal, Alex. So I think that's the next step, I would think, because once you know what is already available today, then we can start asking those questions. What is not available today?
We're still in the inventory phase, I think is the way to think about it. And I kind of, that's the way I was gluing, Kyle, yours and Rom's style of PRs is Rom's was at least like, hey, the trail starts here. You kind of went, all right, here's down the trail, and how do we bridge those together, or extend them to that? Because I was at first I was looking at Rom's like, oh, cool, there's the pointer. Like, oh, how does it work? Like, but I knew where to start. It was a good starting point. I think Alex got a visitor there. He was very patient behind there.
Yeah, and the only reason I asked is because I want to contribute to some of these, and I want to see, like, try to get the question answered of what do we actually want in the end, what level of detail. So, but you answered that question, so that's good.
Yeah, if I might add, so I think whoever is is the expert in the particular package manager. I mean, if you're okay with this PR, let's merge it. And whoever is the expert in a particular package manager, they can start plugging in those on those additional tests. So at least then we have a demonstrable and measurable way of figuring out where we are at.
I'd personally be okay with merging pretty much everything I've saw so far, because it keeps on bringing us forward. It doesn't have to be perfect. Is it good enough to help shaping the clarity? And then we could always make subsequent PRs. This is it's just documents. It's easy to change. Kyle, how do you feel about that? Because I know you were asking questions for Rom's PR. Does that help a little bit, Matt?
I think that's fine. I think if we interpret it as it's a bunch of pointers, a bunch of starting spots to that we have to fill in further, that's fine. And I agree with you. Let's keep merging, like keep bringing stuff back so that other people can contribute easily.
Sounds good.
On top of those, do we want to go around the room and like see if anybody wants to be on the hook for more of these issues? I mean, someone's got to say it, right? I think Rom is kind of getting at it, but
I think I was on the hook for the Debian side, but it's just a question of when. I don't know if it'll be the next me or not.
and I'm happy to do the Python stuff. I've already started. I have a draft. It's not ready yet, but I have a draft one ready that I'm working on. I updated the OCI one a little bit, addressed some of the to-dos in there. There's minor changes. And then I've looked at Alpine recently. I think of them as a simpler case of the Debian case. They're newer, kind of less cruft associated with them. And so I'd be happy to do that one.
I get the feeling a lot of these are probably designed to be distributed by a CDN. And so if it's designed to be distributed by a CDN, then I think we're going to find very few issues trying to move that into an OCI repository.
Yeah, I think it's useful. Like in Alpine, it's like Debian. There's this tarball, right? Catalog. Hey, what do you know? What's in the catalog? So I'll pull it out and show you, like, this is the data that's there. This is the metadata. And here's your packages. And that's all it is. Like, it's not complicated. But you can see there's like 5 to 15 or so metadata fields that are there. But I think having that somewhere is useful to help us understand what we might need.
And I'm kind of curious, knowing some of the stuff that Helm went through back in the day, what the technical challenges were for them, considering how the other package managers are doing it in a CDN friendly way. What things they ran into where they just couldn't make it fit in that model.
When you say couldn't fit in that model, you're talking about the way Helm was doing it with Chart Museum, or the way they try to do it in OCI?
I'm comparing some of the challenges Helm had in their scaling concerns of, hey, we got so many versions of this stuff, so many different projects over here, it just takes too long to download all this, versus Debian, who packages up the entire world and fits it just fine for clients to pull it down. And so what was happening differently in the Helm model versus a lot of these other major package repos that they just couldn't follow the similar model that the package repos were doing in other places?
You're probing on that client versus server question.
Most
That's fair.
likely.
I mean, I can speak to what we saw when we implemented an ACR, but I think what you're really, I'm just trying to figure out, is this, I can certainly speak to that detail and what the scalability problems that we had and the concurrency problems, because that was part of the issue. I'm just debating, I'm happy to answer that question, I guess, is in what we found in that experience there. I just don't want to take this off into too much of a detail on that, because I think what you're really asking is when there's a scenario for client versus server to begin with, and then what is the scoping of, can something satisfy client versus server? Because the oversimplification of that, or the TLDR of the scaling problem was, I think Chart Museum worked really well when there was a reasonable, define reasonable, a finite list of versions for a particular type of packages. So if there's, 6, 10, 15, and there's, 10, 20, 50 different packages, or sorry, versions was the first thing I was trying to say, 16, 20 versions of 50 packages. That's a multiplier that that itself doesn't sound like a huge amount. The fact that you're sticking it into a YAML file that gets downloaded, that's another piece that still is fairly reasonable. And so you're fine, right? Because you got a curated set of Helm charts. When every build that you do, and you do every build on every commit, is generating a new Helm chart, and you've got hundreds of those across all your repos, and you're trying to summarize that every time you build, you're trying to regenerate an index.yaml to be everything. Not only is it a burden to generate that file across everything that you don't actually care about all those details, in most cases, and it's also a big chunk to have to bring down, in addition to the usability problem, because you could argue, was it apt update? I first have to get the index before I can start doing it. That's like a weird extra step. And that was the trippings that was going on, is it broke out of the traditional use of the historic use case of, here's a curated list of a relatively finite set, to, wow, I'm trying to do this in an automated build, and I really only care about the most current or whatever. So the implementation detail, because it wasn't to what I think you're probing it sometimes, if it's client, well, if the server doesn't have to generate this index and have multiple users try to hash that together and deal with concurrency problems, if the server gets a bunch of small pieces and it can respond to all those small pieces, and the client can say, hey, I have everything up until 4 hours ago, just give me the delta, that's a reasonable thing, which is kind of what OCR layers do. But if it has to, every time there's an update, download the entire thing every time, the implementation of some of those goals start to fall apart. So you could argue that the index.html, index.yaml could have been implemented a different way to enable client, but that didn't match the OCI model, where a lot of the processing happens on the server. So I think if you know some of the details of what I'm talking about, it might make sense, but hopefully this group understands where I was going at with that.
So if I was try to quickly summarize, because I see Alex with his hand up, but
yeah,
I was
go ahead,
gonna
Alex. Sorry, go ahead.
try to
Sorry.
summarize this one real quick. Two of the big differences are that you've got every version that's ever been created for a Helm chart, and most OS package managers just keep the current version. And maybe another one that I'm kind of pulling out of this is, when I think of things that are pulling down Helm charts, a lot of times they're ephemeral and they just want something really quick, one package, one chart. And for a distribution, they're long running. The Linux server has been up for a long while. They're just capturing potentially a diff, and they're going to use it for a lot of packages for a lot of installs. So that one big hit isn't as big of a deal compared to how it is on the Helm side. So.
Yeah.
Hopefully I
And I
summarized
think
that.
the way they do their deltas is the server doesn't maintain a single file and then it has to bring down a single file. I think it
Yeah.
does bring down the deltas. So there was a bunch of pieces that got commingled in there that made it a kind of a broken experience or
The lack
non-scalable.
of ephemeral clients is big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, so I think what I'm wondering is if we consider, there's a couple things on my mind as I'm hearing this, is that we have a decentralized publishing requirement, and I think that's one of the hard parts, is to index into a decentralized system. So I think that's like one of the things. But if we can consider that decentralized system as also having as also being like a discrete, like, dynamical system, where you have both temporal and spatial attributes to the content, then when you query into that, you can reference a point in time, and then the resource that you want to discover, and then that's where that delta comes from, because then your next timestamp, then you can just iterate on that. Or get the delta from time to time, and based on, and when I say spatial in that dynamical system, I'm referring to the location within the information system that the content resides, or the actual resource being referenced. And so I think that OCI is actually kind of beautiful for this. Because it already provides the abstractions we need for the decentralized publishing. And then it also, we can layer a data model on top of that has these expressions for that dynamical system. So I think this all comes together really, really elegantly in the space that we're discussing. So I was just throwing that out there as kind of a summary of what you guys were talking about.
Yeah, if I was going to write all again today from scratch, I would probably do some kind of interesting index of indexes to make a nice tree structure you quickly search down. But I don't know if we're at a right point in time for a dramatic rethinking of how this stuff is stored. Maybe we are.
I don't think it requires such a reimagining of how it's stored. I think that we get, and this is me bringing my ideological baggage into this conversation, but I think that semantic triples are a really efficient way of referring to the content within the system. So I don't think we need to reimagine. I think that we can just contextualize what we're publishing with triples. I'm also not a Web3 person. I think it's just really.
So I was trying to follow my own best practice when I often comment that we get all these great comments in the Zoom chat notes that we lose as soon as the chat session's over. So I try to summarize that in the Google Doc notes. So please take a look and see if I've captured those thoughts.
And this kind of goes back to Ram's comment about in the chat, right, where he referenced generate an SBOM, right, and that kind of ties into my reference to that dynamical system. I think you actually get that natively if you can provide those if you can provide those references, to. So I think that we actually get the SBOM generation like he's talking about here for kind of inherent to the system. If we could.
Kyle, do you want to elaborate? Sorry, I either need to read this and stop listening, or maybe just have you voice.
My comment in the thing.
It looks really good. So
I mean, all I was saying is like I think it's just interesting that like a typical client server relationship, like a a client talking to a bank or whatever. You don't the option of like downloading the database, it's not on the table, right? You don't get to do that usually. This is somewhat of a unique thing, even if it's a private repository, right? The client has access to download any package and all of its metadata, with his credentials to do whatever he wants. So it's really just an idea about like, because of that property allows us to even have the conversation about the client downloading effectively the database to do a query, right? It sounds absurd at some level, right? At another level, it sounds brilliant. It just depends on what problem you're solving, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I would say the idea of, and Brandon, I think you like the mirror scenario, but it's like, as opposed to what I often think about is this a replicated copy that you can filter, and there's a little more control. It's the mirror reflects the good and the bad as a control into the mirror, into the remote client repo. So whether it's a client that's doing an client processing or that client is a server, you basically get another database that you can query over. I think the subtle difference to what, and Brandon, please tell me if this doesn't match what you're kind of getting at, where Brandon sometimes talks about the client being able to do rich client-side processing. If that client was a server that was more durable, then now we're talking about, I still need to bring the deltas over to your point, Colin, and I only want to bring as much as I have access to, right? And that might be everything, it might be a subset. And I want to run queries over it. Whether that client is a server that's more durable over time, and it's that replicated copy in my environment, my private environment, my company, is that I'm replicating content from all these public instances, because that's the stability point that I want inside my company. The idea of making it a server that is durable over time versus a client that may be durable, may not, the pattern by how you get the information from one to another, should be efficient regardless. So a client can be a server that connects to another server is a client for part of that communication. So there's an interesting hybrid there of what should those effective APIs be, and because this is where OCI does really well. It's one of the things that I liked about the way as part of the artifact stuff is, if I have a small package, it can be one blob, but I can bring it down really fast. If it's a really large package, the implement real payload, let me say payload instead of package. If the payload is really large, I could make it one layer, or I can break it up into multiple layers. I can break it up into multiple layers simply so I could do concurrent streaming, or I can break it up in multiple layers because some of the layers might be reusable. That's really up to the artifact author to decide how they want to leverage that technology, which is really powerful. So that API, whether it's a single artifact image or it's a collection of them that might share layers, that API to get content from the server to the client, which could be another server, works really well.
I'm going to tie Kyle's comment back to the CDN comment that I was making earlier, which was that if you're talking to a rich server, you can have a rich query interface because that server can be doing a lot of functionality. And when we're talking to something like OCI and some of these other repos that are really popular in the open source space, it's a dumb CDN. It's just serving up files. It changes the equation to how do you serve the content so that the client can efficiently get just the content they need without having to download everything. And so that's why the package repos, when they start looking at it, said, well, clients are going to be querying this thing hopefully a couple of times a week. And so we just need to put some deltas up there, and that's all they need. And they'll pull down the entire delta and pick and choose what they need out of that. When we're looking at how we do this for something like a Helm chart, it might be a different structure that maybe they need to quickly find which package they're looking for, and then from there, find which version of the package they're looking for, and have some way to structure the data so that they can follow that tree quickly and pull down just the data they need out of that whole tree without having to download everything. And so it switches the problem depending on what functionality you have on the back end to implement the solution. And I tend to look at things from the CDN side just because that's what OCI is a very thin shim on top of. And so if you can fit it in there, you can more than likely fit it in OCI. Alex?
What you're saying about this relationship of these package managers to their CDNs, and then to Kyle's point about the database and how much of it you pull down, I think that was the point. I think that we go into another complexity here, because it's this decentralized system. So the database that you're interacting with is predicated on your identity. So the content that whatever your query resolves to is going to be specific to your authorization in that system. And so I think that really adds like another. It's kind of an elegant. Once again, like it's kind of beautiful how this materializes, but I think I don't understand what that means when we talk about these a query and a CDN based on identity. I don't quite understand how that all fits together.
I'm trying to process. I was thinking notes to Brandon's comment, and Alex, you want to slightly detail? Brandon, you want to answer Alex's question before I go back to yours? This is the problem with the sequential conversation. So why don't you address that one first?
No, I think Alex is nailing it right. When you get these rich backend databases that you're talking to, or a rich server interface you're talking with, you can put a lot more queries, like what user you're querying with, and a lot of these other questions that you can't do with a lot of these open publishing systems.
Okay, that's actually perfect then. So I was trying to type my thoughts to think it out. So Brandon, what you're kind of highlighting is when we talk about OCI artifacts as an example, one of the common questions again is, well, why do I need that versus just put it on blob storage? And the value there is, and other package managers do this as well, is they provide a manifest. I'm air quoting manifest because not all of them call a manifest, but they provide some kind of document that on the package manager that describes information around the collection of blobs and the blobs are generic, that wind up in certainly in the large scale systems, or wind up on CDNs, but they don't have to be. So that's the value there, right? It's not just, hey, there's a single blob URL that you can go download, but I don't really know if I want to get that one versus a different one. So the interesting thing is, if there's this manifest around with a description of the content that you can query on this lightweight thing before you pull down the 1 meg to 1 gig, blob, just to decide I don't want it. There's this lightweight manifest that you can work over. I can download the manifest and do the questions locally, or if the server can index those manifests, then I can ask the server a minimal question and it can give me a minimal answer to then decide which blobs I download. So that's super powerful, especially when I finally decide which big blobs I want to download. I've lightened the load, and then if it's backed by a CDN, I can get them really efficiently. So those are all pieces of the system that work really well. It's also one of the complications that makes registries interesting, because I've seen, especially in remote locations, where somebody will, and this is the capabilities of the OCI stuff, is that you can actually redirect the blobs. So I can cache the blobs locally, and locally meaning in a CDN, another CDN, but it's still not complete, because you have to query the REST APIs to know which blobs to get. So if you make the blobs local, great, you've got the big bulky stuff local, but the REST API, you still need to have access to it. Even though it's small payloads, you still need to be able to get to it. So in certain locations, that becomes a problem. So it's just interesting to think about all the pieces on what larger problem you're trying to solve.
I Oh, sorry, Steve. Excuse me.
Well, I was just going to finish up because I realized that the piece to that is, I think what one of the pieces that we're really touching into is a client isn't always just a client. It could be a child server that is replicating information into it. And I think that's it's an interesting way to look at the APIs that says, hey, I might be a short-term, ephemeral client that I want to get lightweight. I want to easily get information for the targeted thing I want to accomplish because I'm in a build system. I just want to get the thing, or I'm on a node that is just running a single container and I need to get some information around some policy information just to know if I should pull the container and so forth. Or that same set of APIs, does it scale to, hey, I'm a remote cache node, a remote cache server that I need to get, the terabyte of data for a bunch of questions that I need to answer locally. Can those APIs scale from a client answering a specific question to a server that's a client to another server to get a delta of information so it is constantly being kept up to date without having to say, hey, I want to be up to date. Give me the terabyte of information, please. And let me figure out the delta. Let me ask you, here is what I last knew about. Can you tell me what's changed? Because if we do that, a client can also ask that same question. When I say a client that's not a server.
With what you're saying, Steve, it makes me wonder what the client's relationship to the categories that so like if you talk about this from a category theory or like an enriched category perspective, like I think that we could change the relationship of the client and how it's doing these queries and discovering this information. And this kind of goes back to the whole CDN thing, where if we go with the category approach, then we don't then our query the result the query response is not based on our identity. Maybe they'll still get pointers to things that aren't with it available to your that you're not authorized to. You'll get pointers to those, and so I think that maybe if we look at not the base content and how we search that, but how we query into abstractions that have expressions for this content, and then we can even get really kind of groovy there, where we're not just searching for this package fits into this category, but then we can start looking at like relationships and then do queries based on like the enriched categories if you're looking at it from a relational perspective. Oh, sorry,
I think you got the last 2 minutes.
Does anybody else want to take the last 2 minutes? I can pass if I need to.
No, but what I would like is when you're done, can we talk about what we want the output of this conversation to be, or if that can drive some action items going into the next 2 weeks?
Okay, so I have a question and then a statement. So let's see if I can get the question answered first. So, given the OCI distribution spec, if you were to put Apache or Nginx or pick your favorite reverse proxy in front of it and not configure it in any special way, right? Just let it do its normal thing, and serve up static content on a disk, right? The standard CDN kind of placeholder. Would an OCI server just read only, of course, right? Because you're only talking about GET requests. Would that work for doing image polls and all that kind of stuff? There's no extra things that have to be managed, right?
There's a little bit extra. I don't know how exactly you will be able to get some of that just on Nginx. I mean, Nginx could front on top of a registry server.
Right, but I'm just thinking like Nginx backed by file system with stuff in it, right? Boring.
Maybe
the standard way that Debian is distributed, right? They're like
Yeah.
FTP, go give me my files, or rsync, go give me my files, and
maybe, but probably not.
okay. So that might be that's an interesting problem in and of itself, right? Like OCI distribution spec then requires a somewhat smart server, not a completely dumb server, to do just the read-only functionality, right? And then real quick, the other observation is that, I mean, the only thing that's mutable in OCI are the tags. Everything else is immutable, right?
Beautiful.
It's a graph. It's fantastic, right? So the stuff that Steve's talking about with respect to, I want to see versions of this thing, that would be a great feature to add to OCI, right? I have either a timestamp or a revision number, something that I can that comes along as a header, and as I pull like diffs from OCI, and then the client, the thick client, the guy who's really a server, sitting in front, says, you know what, I want to give me all the manifests that you've seen since this date or this number, right? And that's something that you would think a halfway smart registry should be able to cough up pretty reasonably. And now you don't need the blobs, right? We're just talking about just give me the descriptors of all the manifests. I can go get them, or maybe just give me the manifests because they're small. Stream those in, and then you have all the data that you need to understand what's going on, because nothing that I'm considering digs into the blobs, right? The blobs are this opaque thing.
I'll do a quick fact check and then turn it over to Alex when we're already +1. The tag listing is mutable when you push different tags, and the refers response is mutable. When you push a manifest, that can be in that refers response. That'll change as well.
Wait, what's
Alex,
the last? Say that again.
The refers response, when you push manifest with the subject, the response from the refers query is mutable.
Well, okay, but I think that's what you want, isn't it? Don't you want to know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The responses are always mutable. I think is the data as it's persisted mutable. Like if I ask
all the blobs in the manifest JSON, everything else is immutable, but I was throwing a few more things that are immutable on top of just the tag itself.
Other tag listing. Actually, I'm doing my own bad thing. I have a hard stop, so I have to go. This is awesome. I love the brainstorming discussion. But go ahead, Alex, when you bring us home.
I was just going to say, I think there's other immutable things too, like annotations could be considered immutable. If you reference content by their annotations, then that's also an immutable reference into the registry. So I think there's other ways of considering mutability in that system. But I know that's not helpful because we're over time, and there's no. If you want to take it to Slack, we can do that. Ram posted it into chat. We need to get these approvals. We need to get eyes on these PRs in here, and then I would just follow up with, and we also to the point, we need to start picking up issues and working them, and I need to do that as well. So that is a to-do for myself and hopefully other people who want to join in. With that, is there any other anything else before we go?
Just have a good weekend, everybody.
Yep.
Failed at my time cop. Sorry.
No, it was good. I was just laughing because I saw Brandon's comment. So have a great weekend, folks.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.